Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Plaid. I'm your host, Brady Kreitzer. I'm a historian of the American frontier and of the North American conservation model. I'm the author of 7 books, and you can catch me every week on the INSP series Into the Wild Frontier. On this show, we discuss the history of the North American conservation model, the history of the American sportsman, and the important role that the American hunter played in the larger development of our republic. We're beginning the series in the 18th century, looking at those earliest hunting experiences in the outdoors and in the wilderness, and exactly what tools and methods our first hunters used. One of the points that I really belabor, and I think it's important, is that we understand that as modern hunters, most of our skills, most of our abilities, and most of our tactics come from what early European settlers first learned from their Native American neighbors. When Europeans first came to the New World, we often have this idea that they came armed with nothing but a dream and a musket, and they hunted and fished and did everything possible to scratch out a living in North America, and that's true. But what we have to understand is that for early settlers, they came from a European world where hunting was essentially illegal, at least big game hunting. Large red stag deer certainly lived in Europe, but the land was owned by aristocrats, by lords and dukes, by landed gentry. For most of European history, to harvest a deer would be completely illegal. Today, unless properly licensed, you face stiff penalties, and even at some points in the Middle Ages, you'd face very harsh punishments, including incarceration and in some cases execution, depending on the time. So when early European settlers came to the New World, they came looking for opportunity, and there was a lot of freedom here, but there's also, as they say, the freedom to starve. So when early Americans came here, hunting was a big part of their world, was a big part of what they did, but a lot of them didn't have the basic skills to do it. If they came in through Philadelphia in the 1750s, many would stop in a city like Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This was sort of one of these inner cities away from the coast where goods were manufactured, particularly flintlock muskets and rifles. Some of the finest gun makers in the colonies lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And they'd be armed with a weapon, but not really know what to do with it. They knew they were supposed to shoot at game animals, but they didn't have the skills. They didn't have the experience. They didn't know how to hunt. And that's where that critical relationship with native peoples really comes in to the world. You know, we often think of frontiers as places of conflict, settlers and native peoples fighting, but most of the time they were places of blending, learning and growing and forging a new frontier culture altogether. It was a new world for everyone. And one of the things that native peoples gave to early European settlers was the skills necessary to feed themselves and to hunt in the wilderness. And what I have before us is one of the really critical pieces of material culture that those first frontier hunters gained from the native peoples. It's right here. It's the wing bone turkey call. Now, if you're a turkey hunter, you know the importance of a good call. And really, even a so-so call will work most of the time. But what definitely will not work is a bad call. And really, since the middle of the 20th century, we've developed a number of ways to take some of the skill out of turkey calling. And of course, we see those here. We have the ever-present box call, and what's become very popular over the last 30 years or so is the latex mouth call. And these will replicate any number of turkey sounds pretty easily, yelps and clucks, and if you're really good, even a gobble. And there's some really good callers out there. I think turkeys are so fascinating in terms of game animals in North America because they're really unlike any of the other species that we see. When you hunt an elk, when you hunt a deer, there are certain disadvantages that animal has, and the biggest is their eyesight. Deer and elk have incredibly poor eyesight. And that can be pretty forgiving for a novice hunter. But turkey is really a different animal altogether, we can say, because they have certain skills that are far superior to the hunters that pursue them. And one of them is their eyesight. Turkeys have an amazing visual acuity. They can see more colors on different spectrums than we can. And that's largely the result of their evolution. Birds need to be able to spot food moving from sometimes very far distances, whether they're in the air or on a roost in a tree. Their survival depends on it. So unlike, say, a deer hunt or an elk hunt, where you can take to the forest in bright blaze orange, you have to do everything possible to blend into the landscape when you're hunting a turkey, because even the slightest movement, it will catch. Turkeys are amazing animals. That being said, they're also amongst the dumbest animals I've ever seen. I really respect and admire the bird for its physical attributes, its physical advantages that it has over the hunters that pursue them. But they are incredibly susceptible, so it kind of comes out as a wash in many cases. I've seen a turkey staring into the chrome bumper of a pickup truck, and I've seen it see its own reflection and proceed to peck its own reflection, much to, I imagine, great physical harm to itself, for almost 2 minutes straight, believing that reflection was another turkey, threatening its dominance of a region. I've seen turkeys, and if you're a turkey farmer, you may be aware of this, pile up on top of each other in the cold, in the rain, to stay warm, only to suffocate one another. They are enormously stupid animals, and I say that in the most loving of ways. But they make up for it with other distinct advantages. And part of that, I guess, lack of general intelligence that we see from mammals, for example, is that they're susceptible to calls, following them, believing them to be potential mates. So that's where the wingbone turkey call of the 18th century, created by Native Americans, really comes into play. We see turkey hunts in the New World from almost the earliest time of European arrival in terms of records. Hernan Cortez, the infamous conqueror of Mesoamerica, a man who, with a great deal of assistance, toppled the Aztec Empire in the 16th century, will write in 1522 that the North American wild turkey in Mexico is something like a unique New World species of peacock, is how he describes it. And we know why that is. A male turkey, a tom, a gobbler, is a very proud animal. He struts his stuff unabashedly. And again, that's to his detriment as hunters. And that's really a bird thing. Birds aren't like mammals. They're very different. And they play by very different rules. But the admirable traits of the tom, his pride, his flamboyance, is also what often leads to his downfall. So the turkey call is really important for that. And after Cortez writes about the American peacock, the North American wild turkey, it becomes all of the rage in Europe. By 1600, most of the wealthy people in England and France and Germany and Spain all will have a flock of turkeys on their lands, on their plantations, on their estates. They become a real status symbol. But we also see North American hunters talk a lot about the wild turkey in terms of some of its finer points of hunting. So in one case, we have a hunter in western New York in 1762 writing about how he watches the great hunters of the Iroquois take on the task of harvesting these birds. And again, these are skill sets still used today by North American hunters, really the base of the North American hunting system, that are inherited from native peoples who had perfected it for thousands of years. But he'll write that one of the methodologies that the Iroquois used for hunting was to shoot the animals off the roost while they sat. And again, the Iroquois would not be using bow and arrows at this point. By the 1760s, they'd be readily armed with American-made muskets or rifles. One quote that observer gives us is that the turkeys are, quote, so tame or stupid that they are in the trees and they stand perhaps till the last of them be killed. That's what he'll say. The Iroquois knew once a bird is on the roost, if they calculate and time their attack at the right way, you can easily shoot them. Another example comes from Alabama, the Deep South, during the French and Indian War or the 7 Years' War, from a British lieutenant named Henry Timberlake. And he talks about watching the young native peoples of the Creek Nation, whenever they hunt, and how they go about approaching bagging a turkey for dinner. He'll say that turkeys are, quote, pursued only by the children, who are very expert at killing with a sarbacane, or hollow cane, through which they blow a small dart. They seldom miss. He said they regularly harvest turkeys with what we think of today as a blowgun from 20 or 30 feet. So even as children, the pursuit of the turkey is mastered at a young age. And a blowgun is a very inefficient weapon that takes a high degree of skill, not only knowing of how far you can shoot in terms of range, but the power required to kill various species of game. But this will bring us to the wingbone turkey call. The mouth call is a really useful tool for harvesting a game animal. They're absolute masters with the mouth call. And then, of course, you have the box call, the box turkey call here. And again, this is kind of the call that everybody starts with today. And this is really an innovation of the early 20th century or late 19th century, depending on the sources you look at. But with only a little bit of practice, a young boy or girl could take to the field and really fool a gobbler with this call. But these weren't around in the 18th century. So the earliest native hunters really called turkeys in two ways. One was with their own mouth, just mimicry and imitation of the turkey call, and those were the true masters of the craft. The early paleo hunters and later native hunters of the modern era. But then they worked with the wingbone turkey call, and this is really just the pinnacle of, I think, innovation of this early hunting world from a conservation viewpoint. I always believe in giving something back anytime you take something from the natural world. When you think about animals, there's almost no plant or animal that exclusively takes in nature without returning. If you think of a deer, eating from an apple tree, they're going to be dropping, dung along the way, and that dung will contain valuable nutrients for the soil and sometimes seeds of other species that it's already eaten. Yes, they take the apples, but they give something back. When you think of a grizzly bear eating an elk, yes, they're going to consume a lot of meat, but they're going to leave behind a pretty sizable carcass as well that other animals, from wolves to coyotes to even smaller microbial organisms, will eat and enjoy and thrive off of, vultures and other birds of prey as well. Humans are really the only species that, when not careful, can take from nature and not give back. So we have to be very mindful of that, in my opinion. Anytime I go into the forest to hunt or fish or forage, whether it be fruits or vegetables or mushrooms, I'm always sure to leave something behind. I may carry some native seeds with me from a native species and plant them when I leave. If I do harvest a game animal, obviously I'll leave behind, after cleaning the animal, the remnants for the other carnivores and smaller animals to live off and survive off of. I feel like there's a balance in nature of giving and taking. And that's really something that comes from these early native hunters, and I like to think of it as their early legacy passed down generationally to me. But here's a really great example of using what nature gives you and wasting nothing. This turkey call comes from the dried bones of a turkey wing. If you're familiar with the anatomy of a turkey's wing, you're going to have three major bones. These are tied together with sinew, which you'll get from a deer that you harvested. Sinew's an abundant resource inside the deer's physical body. And it's, once dried, very easily preserved, easily used, and as you can see, neatly decorated with turkey tracks and turkey feathers. But you can do almost anything with this turkey call that you could do with a modern turkey call, as we see here. You can yelp, you can cluck. I've even heard people gobble with these. And as we've talked about, turkeys, for all their admirable qualities, are pretty susceptible to a good turkey call. And this is something that any hunter can make themselves. If you've ever harvested a bird, you know, it's another way to kind of keep that experience or that legacy or honor that animal if you choose to, which many native peoples did. If there is an especially exceptionally difficult bird to hunt and track and kill, they would make the wing bone into a turkey call, and this could be passed down generationally. So this call could do anything that these calls could do, and could do them with great efficiency. We do have another example of one of these being made. This comes from the 1790s from a hunter in Michigan. And he'll talk about watching some of the Great Lakes peoples hunt. The Ojibwa, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and of course he's studying their every move. He'll say that the hunters hid in some secluded place with their, quote, turkey calls ready for use. These turkey calls consist of the hollow bone of a turkey's wing, and in the mouth of an experienced hunter can be made to exactly imitate the piping sound of the mother bird when calling her brood together. Soon the maternal notes of the old birds are heard, and the hunters respond with their calls, luring them on to certain destruction. So what's the piping he's talking about? I'll try and play this. I'm a collector as much as anything. I'm not great at this, but you can take a listen and see what you think. So that was loud. Again, this is not meant for YouTube videos, but this is meant for being heard across a valley or a hollow, in the forest. It's just an exceptional tool, and it's one that if you had gone back any point in the last 10,000 years in North America, you would have seen. Now, you can't buy these at a sporting goods store. This is something that a hunter really has to craft and make on their own. It's a rite of passage as much as anything else. But it's one of those really great legacies and connections back, not just to the 18th century, but to much, much earlier hunters before them. So as always, thank you for joining us. I'm Brady Kreitzer. This has been Buffalo Plaid.